Chapter 4. Plato. Plato, like Socrates, is preeminently a moralist, but he reverts to general consideration of the universe and deals with politics and legislation. Plato, a disciple of Socrates. Plato, like Xenophon, was a pupil of Socrates, but Xenophon only wanted to be the clerk of Socrates, and Plato, as an enthusiastic disciple, was at the same time very faithful and very unfaithful to Socrates. He was a faithful disciple to Socrates in never failing to place morality in the foremost rank of all philosophical considerations, in that he never varied. He was an unfaithful disciple to Socrates in that, imaginative and an admirable poet, he bore back philosophy from earth to heaven. He did not forbid himself, quite the contrary, to pile up great systems about all things and to envelop the universe in his vast and daring conceptions. He invincibly established morality, the science of virtue, as the final goal of human knowledge. In his brilliant and charming Socratic dialogues, he formed great systems in all the works in which he introduces himself as speaking in his own name. He was very learned and acquainted with everything that had been written by all the philosophers before Socrates, particularly Heraclitus, Pythagoras, Parmenides, and Anaxagoras. He reconsidered all their teaching, and he himself brought to consideration a force and a wealth of mind such as appear to have had no parallel in the world. The ideas. Seeking, in his turn, what are the first causes of all and what is eternally real behind the simulations of this transient world, he believed in a single God, as had many before him, but in the bosom of this God, so to speak, he seemed to see, ideas, that is to say, eternal types of all things which in this world are variable, transient, and perishable. What he effected by such novel, original, and powerful imagination is clear. He replaced the Olympus of the populace by a spiritual Olympus, the material mythology by an idealistic mythology, polytheism by polyidism, if it may be so expressed, the gods by types. Behind every phenomenon, stream, forest, mountain, the Greeks perceived a deity, a material being like themselves, more powerful than themselves. Behind every phenomenon, behind every thought as well, every feeling, every institution, behind everything, no matter what it be, Plato perceived an idea, immortal, eternal, indestructible, and incorruptible, which existed in the bosom of the eternal, and of which all that comes under our observation is only the vacillating and troubled reflection, and which supports, animates, and for a time preserves everything that we can perceive. Hence, all philosophy consists in having some knowledge of these ideas. How is it possible to attain such knowledge? By raising the mind from the particular to the general, by distinguishing in each thing what is its permanent foundation, what it contains that is least changing, least variable, least circumstantial. For example, a man is a very complex being, he has countless feelings, countless diversified ideas, countless methods of conduct and existence. What is his permanent foundation? It is his conscience, which does not vary, undergoes no transformation, always obstinately repeats the same thing. The foundation of man, the eternal idea of which every man on earth is here the reflection, is the consciousness of good. Man is an incarnation on earth of that part of God, which is the will for good. According as he diverges from or approaches more nearly to this will, is he less or more man. The Platonic dialectic and morality. This method of raising oneself to the ideas is what Plato termed dialectic, that is to say, the art of discernment. Dialectic differentiates between the fundamental and the superficial, the permanent and the transient, the indestructible and the destructible. This is the supreme philosophic method which contains all the others and to which all the others are reduced. Upon this metaphysic and by the aid of this dialectic, Plato constructed an extremely pure system of morality, which was simply an imitation of God, as, later on, came the imitation of Jesus Christ. The whole duty of man was to be as like God as he could. In God exist the ideas of truth, goodness, beauty, greatness, power, etc. Man ought to aim at relatively realizing those ideas which God absolutely realizes. God is just, or justice lies in the bosom of God, which is the same thing. Man cannot be the just one, but he can be a just man, and there is the whole matter, for justice comprises everything, or, to express it differently, is the characteristic common to all which is valuable. Justice is goodness, justice is beautiful, justice is true, justice is great, because it reduces all particular cases to one general principle. Justice is powerful, being the force which maintains, opposed to the force which destroys. Justice is eternal and invariable. To be just in all the meanings of the word is the duty of man and his proper goal. The immortality of the soul. Plato shows marked reserve as to the immortality of the soul and as to rewards and penalties beyond the grave. He is neither in opposition nor formally favorable. We feel that he wishes to believe in it rather than that he is sure about it. He says that it is a fine wager to make, which means that even should we lose, it is better to believe in this possible gain than to disbelieve. Further, it is legitimate to conclude both from certain passages in the Laws and from the beautiful theory of Plato on the punishment which is an expiation, and on the expiation which is medicinal to the soul, and consequently highly desirable, that Plato often inclines strongly towards the doctrine of posthumous penalties and rewards, which presupposes the immortality of the soul. Platonic love. Platonic love, about which there has been so much talk and on which, consequently, we must say a word, at least to define it, is one of the applications of his moral system. As in the case of all other things, the idea of love is in God. There it exists in absolute purity, without any mixture of the idea of pleasure, since pleasure is essentially ephemeral and perishable. Love in God consists simply in the impassioned contemplation of beauty, physical and moral. We shall resemble God if we love beauty precisely in this way, without excitement or agitation of the senses. Politics. One of the originalities in Plato is that he busies himself with politics, that is, that he makes politics a part of philosophy, which had barely been thought of before him. I say barely, because Pythagoras was a legislator, but which has ever since been taken into consideration. Plato is aristocratic, no doubt because his thought is generally such, independently of circumstances, also, perhaps, because he attributed the great misfortunes of his country which he witnessed to the Athenian democracy, then yet again, perhaps, because that Athenian democracy had been violently hostile and sometimes cruel to philosophers, and more especially to his own master. According to Plato, just as man has three souls, or if it be preferred, three centers of activity, which govern him: intelligence in the head, courage in the heart, and appetite in the bowels even, so the city is composed of three classes. Wise and learned men at the top, the warriors below, and the artisans and slaves lower still. The wise men will govern. Accordingly, the nations will never be happy save when philosophers are kings, or when kings are philosophers. The warriors will fight to defend the city, never as aggressors. They will form a caste poor, stern to itself, and redoubtable. They will have no individual possessions, everything will be in common: houses, furniture, weapons, wives even, and children. The people, finally, living in strict equality, either by equal partition of land or on land cultivated in common, will be strictly maintained in probity, honesty, austerity, morality, sobriety, and submissiveness. All arts, except military music and war dances, will be eliminated from the city. She needs neither poets nor painters, not yet musicians, who corrupt morals by softening them and by making all feel the secret pang of voluptuousness. All theories, whether aristocratic or tending more or less to communism, are derived from the politics of Plato, either by being evolved from them or by harking back to them. The master of the idealistic philosophy. Plato is for all thinkers, even for his opponents, the greatest name in human philosophy. He is the supreme authority of the idealistic philosophy, that is, of all philosophy which believes that ideas govern the world and that the world is progressing towards a perfection which is somewhere and which directs and attracts it. For those even who are not of his school, Plato is the most prodigious of all the thinkers who have united psychological wisdom, dialectical strength, the power of abstraction and creative imagination, which last in him attains to the marvelous.